We are delighted to have welcomed back to our Westchester Reformed Temple community Rabbi Jeffrey Salkin, who got his start here at WRT in 1973. He'll tell you how he came connected to our community 50 years ago and has returned again and again, always as a friend, a teacher, a mentor, and an important voice for our community to hear. He is one of American Judaism's most prolific and most quoted rabbis. His blog, which is called Martini Judaism, for those who want to be shaken and stirred, published by the Religion News Service, won a 2022 Wilbur Award from the Religion Communicators Council for Best Religion Blog of the Year, as well as 2 previous awards. He is a much-published author and essayist, having appeared in the Washington Post, Commentary Magazine, the Wall Street Journal, the Huffington Post, Tablet Magazine, Mosaic, The Forward, and JTA, the Jewish Telegraphic Agency. He has discussed the American political scene on the BBC and CNN, including CNN just this week. He has contributed articles to countless scholarly journals, and his 10 books discuss subjects such as B'nai Mitzvah, Israel, masculinity, and Jewish culture, as well as 3 Torah commentaries, of which I'm a contributing essayist in his book Text Messages, a Torah commentary for teens. He also has a forthcoming book on the future of liberal, that is, non-Orthodox Judaism, scheduled to be published this coming fall. He serves as the rabbi of Temple Israel in West Palm Beach, Florida, and hobbies include music, movies, bicycling, and consuming vast quantities of coffee. I've enjoyed spending the week with Rabbi Jeff Salkin. This engagement tonight is also a prelude to his appearance tomorrow, teaching us Torah study at 9 a.m. and a community-wide conversation at 11 called How Jews Got Woke. And that is for the entire congregation. It will be part of our Sharing Shabbat adult study, our Torah study, who want to continue learning with Rabbi Salkin tomorrow morning, and the entire community is welcome to come to hear Rabbi Salkin tomorrow at 11. I've asked my friend to contribute a few remarks to tonight's celebratory service of Yom HaAtzmaut by sharing what Israel means to me today. Rabbi Jeffrey Salkin.
Shabbat Shalom. I'll answer the question for you that's going to haunt you unless and until I deal with it. The answer to the first question is 5. The answer to the second question is no. No, I did not play basketball. In fact, when the basketball coach saw me when I was in high school, he said to me, "You should be playing basketball with your long legs." I said, "No, I want to become a rabbi. I want to write books and I want to teach people to cut it out, Salkin, with your legs in basketball." I said, "Have it your way." So I played basketball. He called me into his office and he said, "Salkin, I want to talk about a career as a Reform rabbi." More on that later. Yes, it was exactly 50 years ago, 1973, right before the Yom Kippur War, that I first entered this building. No, I was not a child in the early childhood center. Your math is wrong. I was, however, a young religious school teacher. I was attending churches at the time, and I was engaged to teach our 8th graders, some of whom are grandparents now. I had the great blessing of knowing Rabbi Jack Stern of blessed memory, of speaking here when Rabbi Rick Jacobs was the rabbi, and enjoying and almost treating as oxygen my time with Rabbi. I can say without fear of contradiction, this is the only America where I have learned from 3 generations of rabbis and felt close to them. And being present at this service with your wonderful, wonderful cantor and a new microphone, which is itself a metaphor for Zionism, tikkun ha-mikrofon, it's really been a blessing. This really happened. A number of years ago, my young cousin was on a USY, United Synagogue youth trip to Israel, and they took the kids up to Rosh HaNikra, to the grottos, and she was leaning over to take a photograph, and she dropped her camera into the water. She called her mother absolutely heartbroken, and her mother said, "Okay, these things happen, the camera's gone, and all your photographs." A month later, she gets a package. It's her camera. Here's the story. There were some Israeli soldiers on maneuvers in the Mediterranean. There were some skin divers. An Israeli soldier found her camera at the bottom of the Mediterranean, pulls out the card, looks at the photographs, sees a bunch of kids wearing USY Minneapolis Israel Mission t-shirts, calls USY. They get in touch with USY in Minneapolis. They ask, is there anyone who lost a camera in Israel? That's how my young cousin got her camera back. This sort of stuff happens a lot. Just today, I got an email from a stranger who found a bag of mine on Southwest Airlines and said, "It's in the mail, I'm returning it to you." The scary thing is I didn't even realize I had lost it. But I want to say that this story has an element of Rak b'Yisrael, only in Israel. Because, my friends, this is one of the most beautiful, delicate mitzvot that we have in our entire collection of 613, returning lost objects. In the ancient temple in Jerusalem, there was a chamber where if people found something, they would bring it, and if people lost something, they would go and they would find it. There's a wonderful midrash that says that every tribe of ancient Israel had a job to do, and the tribe of Dan was the tribe that had to walk last in the trek through the wilderness because it was their gig to find all the stuff that the other tribes had lost and bring it back to them. And so now I'm going to share with you my own reflection on what it was that the Jewish people had lost and what we found as a result of Israel. Help me with this. What had we lost in our history, and what did Israel help us find? Anybody? Help me write the sermon. What had we lost, and what did Israel help us find? What's that? Home? Yes. Number one, Israel helped us find home. We had lost our home, and we got our home back. Now, this is very interesting. You see, for centuries, when we Jews reclaimed our sense of what it meant to live with the holiness of place, the holiest places we had were the home. By the way, what's the holiest place in the Jewish home? This is not a joke. This is true. What's the holiest place in the Jewish home? And the holiest place in the kitchen? The table. The table. Because the table is like a substitute for the ancient altar in Jerusalem. And then we have, of course, had the holiness of the synagogue. But what we had lost was the holiness of a home that was a land. A number of years ago, I was in Jerusalem. It was Erev Shabbat. I was on my way to a friend's house for dinner. And there was one of those gorgeous Jerusalems. You know what it paints the entire city purple. Then you understand the song, Yerushalayim Shel Zahav, Jerusalem of gold. This is God's paintbrush. And I'm standing on a hill, and there's an old woman standing next to me, and we're looking at the sunset. And she turns to me and she says, Rov ha'anashim lo yiru et ze. The overwhelming majority of people will never see this. Number one, the overwhelming majority of people will never see a sunset in Jerusalem. Sadly, if you have, consider yourself blessed. And number two, even when they're in Jerusalem, the overwhelming majority of people never see it. There is so much for us to worry about in terms of Israel, but I have to say, this week for her birthday party, I'm not bringing that stuff up. Like when my Aunt Izzy turned 75, the cousins don't sit around and talk about how she could be a nuisance. It's about praise. It's about the miracle. I have to tell you this story. This is true. All my stories are true. A number of years ago, I knew of a woman. She was Jewish, and this woman was a major anti-Israel activist. She had Israel phobia. She believed there should not be a Jewish state, and she worked to undermine Israel, writing articles, letters. How's your Yiddish? She was farbissina. She was like really bitter. And then one day she developed a stomach ache. She went to the doctor and the doctor said, The doctor put a belt around her stomach and gave her a pill to swallow and said, just swallow this pill, come back in 2 weeks. She did. She came back. The doctor said, I got some good news and some bad news. The bad news is that you seem to have a tumor in your stomach. And the good news is that it's so small that we can operate and deal with it and it'll go away. And this woman bursts into tears. And she said, where was this technology developed? And he said, oh, in Israel. The year afterwards, she went to AIPAC. Yes, we got our home back. There's a second thing that we got back. We got back our dignity. We got back our dignity. We had lost it. We didn't have power anymore. And Israel means that we now get to stand up. Now, I will say this. I'll be the first to admit. I'm breaking my rule. Power and the way we use power has all sorts of ethical issues. But let me tell you this. I'd rather have too much power and struggle with those issues than too little power and have to say Kaddish a lot more. When I was in 7th grade, it was 1967, and it was during the Six-Day War. Those of you who were alive back then, you know who you are. You remember the miracle of Israel's victory, which was, by the way, just another version of Israel's miracle victory 75 years ago this week. I know it's hard for you to imagine this. I was a scrawny kid. I was almost as tall as I am now, but I was a lot skinnier than I am now. I had long hair. I was a poet and a guitar player. I was not an athlete. We've already established that. And I know it's hard for you to imagine this, but just believe me when I say this. I was the victim of bullies. I got bullied a lot. There was a wonderful ritual that took place in the in the cafeteria of my middle school. We called it junior high back then, where these would come to me, and it was beautiful. There was a whole thing that went along with this, and they took the tray out of my hand, and I would have to pick. The biggest bully during the Six-Day War comes over to me. This guy was huge. This guy was like a refrigerator. By the way, we're best friends on Facebook now. Because let's be honest, I'm doing much better than he is. He comes over to me I'm standing there with my tray, and I'm ready to basically say shalom to my lunch, or watch it as it was all over my shoes. He comes over to me, and he sticks his face in front of mine, and he said, "Hey, you know what? You Jews really do know how to fight, don't you?" And he walked away. That's what it meant for this 13-year-old kid. Israel stood up for our dignity. There was something else that we had lost over the centuries. We had lost a spoken language. Hebrew was basically for study and for prayer, but no one spoke Hebrew anymore. And then Eliezer ben Yehuda revived the Hebrew language. I have to tell you this. Please do not misunderstand or underestimate the power of this miracle. Listen to me. Kids, stay in school. Kids, listen to me. If you're Hebrew and if you're learning how to speak the Hebrew, no one did that 100 years ago. You have bragging rights now over generations of Jewish kids. When I go to Israel, when I go to Jerusalem, and I go to synagogue, I deliberately sit in a place near the window so that I have a stereophonic experience of the Hebrew language. With one ear, I'm hearing the prayers chanted in a language that the prophet Isaiah would understand, and with the other ear, I'm listening to the kids outside in the playground who are yelling at each other and taunting each other in modern Hebrew. And that is why being in the synagogue this evening and hearing the squeals of children is sacred to me. Doesn't matter that they're not doing it in Hebrew. But knowing this synagogue, someday they will. And there's one last thing that Israel brought us back to. And that is the idea that we, as a people, would be able to have our sanctity back and to feel a sense of connection to Jewish time in a Jewish place. I used to live in Rehavia, in Jerusalem, a fancy neighborhood, right next to the worst ever intersection in the city. Cars would whip around there, and there were always accidents. One year on Yom Kippur, a Russian Jewish kid went into the middle of the street, and he lay down in the middle of the street with his arms open wide. Why? Because he could. Because there were no cars. And he was saying, as it were, I'm home. There are no cars in Yom Kippur. I'm free. That's what Israel means to me today. And I am well aware of the fact that Israel has many critics. I'm well aware of the fact that Israel has many blemishes. And tonight, lo echpat li, I don't care. This is about praise. Let me end with the following story about Mrs. Goldberg. Mrs. Goldberg's son, Jonathan, decides that he wants to enroll in an officer training program. Mrs. Goldberg is in the Bronx, of course, and Jonathan goes down to Fort Benning in Georgia to enroll in this officer training program. And he calls his mother and says, "Hey, Mom, I'm graduating. I want you and all your friends to come down to Fort Benning for my graduation ceremonies." And so she gets all of her friends, and they get on a bus. Takes them 2 days, but they get down to Fort Benning in Georgia. And they're sitting there, and they're watching the ceremony. And they see Jonathan's squad. They're all dressed in white. They're gorgeous. You got to know this, right? She sees Jonathan's squad coming out and going to the reviewing stand where all the generals are. And they're marching over there, and they salute the generals. And Jonathan is walking this way, Ba-dum, 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 bum. Mrs. Goldberg turns to her friends and she says, "This is so wonderful. I'm so proud of him. He's the only one who's doing it right." Friends, I have to tell you something. Sometimes, when you're a lover and supporter of Israel, you do get the feeling that we're marching in a different direction. But I have to tell you, when people tell you that the Jews are not a people, just a religion, we march in a different direction. When people tell you that Israel has no right to a state, that Jews have no right to sovereignty, we march in a different direction. When people tell you that the only country in the world whose imperfections and blemishes cancel it, we march in a different direction. No one ever said that England should not exist because of the years of oppression of Northern Ireland. You ever notice that? No one ever said that South Africa should not exist because of the years of apartheid. You ever notice that? No one ever said that Red China shouldn't exist because of the oppression of Tibet. Ever notice that? And no one ever said that the United States should not have existed because of that adventure that I'm looking around, some of us lived through, that little adventure called Vietnam. The only country whose flaws condemn it is the Jewish state. And I got a problem with that. I hope you're always going to join me in marching in that different direction. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.